God always restores. That is not a motivational slogan. That is a pattern written into almost every major story in Scripture, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. But here is the part nobody talks about. Restoration in the Bible almost never comes the way people expect it. It almost never comes when people expect it. And in almost every case, there is something that has to happen first, something specific, something the person often does not realize they are doing before the door of restoration opens. Job got back twice what he lost, but read the verse carefully. It does not say God restored Job after Job had suffered enough. It does not say God restored Job after Job had prayed hard enough. It says God restored Job's fortunes when he prayed for his friends. That is the verse. That is the sequence. Forgiveness first, restoration second, always in that order. Peter was restored, but it happened beside a charcoal fire, the same kind of fire where he had denied Jesus 3 times. The same smell in the air, the same setting. Jesus met Peter not just with forgiveness, but at the exact point of failure. He did not erase the past, he redeemed it. Samson got his strength back, but nobody was watching when it happened. His hair grew back in a prison, quietly, while the Philistines celebrated. They did not even notice. The restoration was already underway before anyone recognized it. There is a pattern here. And if you are waiting for God to restore something you have lost, a relationship, a dream, a season, a version of yourself, you need to understand how this actually works. Because the sequence is not random, and the timing is almost never what you would choose, but it is always purposeful. Before we go through the pattern, I need to establish one principle. Without it, everything else sounds like a formula, and restoration is not a formula. The principle is this: God restores people, not positions. This is the mistake most people make when they are waiting for restoration. They are focused on the thing that was lost, the job, the relationship, the reputation, the financial standing. And God is focused on the person who lost it. Because here is the reality. If God restored the position before he restored the person, it would destroy them, or it would corrupt them, or it would become the very thing that holds them back from what he actually wants for their life. Look at Job. God did not restore Job's wealth and then deal with his heart. He dealt with Job's heart, 42 chapters of wrestling, questioning, and eventually encountering God in the whirlwind, and then restored the wealth. Job who received the restoration was not the same Job who lost everything. He was someone who had been to the edge of his own understanding and found God there. Look at Peter. Jesus did not hand Peter back his role as the leader of the disciples and say, "Don't worry about the denial." He met Peter, the charcoal fire, the same smell, the same memory, and asked him 3 times if he loved him, one for each denial. Not to punish Peter, to heal him, to override the memory not by erasing it, but by replacing each denial with an affirmation, each betrayal with a commission. Feed my lambs, tend my sheep, feed my sheep. The restoration of Peter's role came after the restoration of Peter's heart, always in that order. So when you are waiting for God to restore something, keep that principle close. He is not slow. He is building the person who can hold what is coming. Here is the first thing the pattern shows us, and it is the most counterintuitive one on this list. In the Bible, restoration almost never comes through the completion of suffering. It comes through the act of forgiveness. This is the Job principle, and it is the clearest example in all of Scripture. Job lost everything: his children, his wealth, his health, his reputation. He sat in the ash heap while his skin was covered in sores. His 3 closest friends arrived, and for 7 days, they sat in silence with him. That part was good. Then they opened their mouths and spent 37 chapters telling Job that his suffering was his fault. They were wrong. God said so directly. At the end of the book, God turned to Eliphaz and said, "My anger burns against you and against your 2 friends, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." And then God said something that should stop us cold. He told the 3 friends to go to Job and have Job pray for them. The people who had judged him, misrepresented God to him, twisted his suffering into accusation. They needed Job's intercession. And here is the verse that changes everything. "And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he prayed for his friends." Not when his suffering reached a certain threshold, not when he had learned enough lessons, not when God decided enough time had passed. When he prayed for his friends, the restoration was on the other side of an act of forgiveness toward the people who had made his suffering worse. That is not coincidence. That is the pattern. Now think about what this means for you. Is there a person in your story, someone who made your pain harder? Someone who judged you when you were already down, someone who walked away when you needed them, that you are still holding? Not necessarily an obvious bitterness, sometimes it is quieter than that. Sometimes it is the way you go silent when their name comes up, the story you still carry about what they did. Job 42 verse 10 connects the dots clearly. Restoration followed forgiveness, not forgiveness followed restoration. The diagnostic question here is not, have you suffered enough? The question is, who are you still not praying for? The second thing the pattern shows us is this: God almost never restores from a distance. He meets you at the exact point of your failure, the same setting, the same circumstances, the same smell in the air. Peter's story is the most precise example of this in the New Testament. The night Jesus was arrested, Peter followed at a distance to the courtyard of the high priest. It was cold. Someone had lit a charcoal fire. Peter stood by it to warm himself, and there, by that charcoal fire, a servant girl looked at him and said, "You also were with Jesus of Galilee."
A buget build on what you actually spend. I just toward what you want to spend. Is a tung thác work. He buget da internet to be perfect to work. It just net to exist.
Now fast forward to after the resurrection. Jesus appears on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. The disciples come in from fishing, and John records something that most readers skip right past. He mentions specifically that there was a charcoal fire on the beach. This is the only other time in the entire New Testament that the Greek word for charcoal fire appears. In the same gospel, same author, used twice deliberately. Jesus chose that setting, not an upper room, not the temple courts, a charcoal fire on a beach at dawn. The same smell in the air as the night Peter had said, "I do not know the man." And Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?"
And that trusting. He problem shifter identifies Easter wanting to improve your financial situation. Is a poster of a hurt that US money to mana anxiety, identity, comparison, or comfort. Thin money voucher book never actually resolve. He pucha thác profit relief for 20 minutes and rest for 20 days. He úc ra thác fail necessa bk somel ni babi h1. He impung bi thác fail laia reward and become a debt. On of test ar the same group, a hấp looking to money for something only got can profit. Philippines 4 giờ 11 phút thera 12 show powder screen content as something heliren. A practice diskin acquit thera season of plenty and season of one. Not a personally right. Event before the financial situation impro. In fact, especially before it impro, BKA hất thác lirang content in scarcity carry thác content into abundance. And thác sở the person whose financial habit actually stick. Practically, content look like a pause before every non-essential pucha, not a guilt just a question. In what God has already provided. Genesis 41 record one of the most regular important financial decisions in all of Scripture. Joseph, positing as second in command of Egypt. Receive advance warning of 7 years of abundant fallout by 7 years of severe famine. His sponsor wants to pray for provision when the famine arises. It was to build a system during the abundance that will make survival possible when scarcity came. 1/5 of every harvest, stock, named, research, rotate, not consume. That typically the right people to action. Joseph acted on the warning before the consequent made action unavident. And the son wants to just that his household survive. This is the saving account. This is the financial buffer that protects every other good habit you build from being undone by a single united expense. Without it, the cycle repeats endlessly. Every month of good financial decision get wiped out by one share repair, one medical bill, one slavic at work. Building your storehouse doesn't require large super. It requires decision to set aside a specific amount consisting before anything else compared for it. Until a buffer exists that can absorb a shock without sending you back to step 1. Start with one month of essential expenses, 10 2, 10 3. The amount matters less than the unbroken habit of building it, because the storehouse that says you in the famine was built one harvest at a time. Proverbs 22, 7 identifies that with one of the most vivid descriptions in scripture. The borrow is là to the lender. Not in debt, not in convent, là.
The fact that you cannot see it does not mean it is not happening. The hair grows whether or not anyone is watching. The fourth thing, restoration almost always comes with more than what was lost. Now here is the part that is easy to misunderstand, so I want to be careful. In Scripture, restoration is not always a straight return to what existed before. It is often a deeper version, a wider version, a more significant version. Job received twice what he had before, 14,000 sheep instead of 7,000, 6,000 camels instead of 3,000. But he did not receive his original children back. He received new children, and there is a bittersweet quality to that, which any honest reading of Job has to acknowledge. He lived 140 years after his restoration, and he saw 4 generations of his descendants. The latter days of his life were blessed more than the beginning. But the grief of what was lost did not simply disappear. This is why the promise of restoration is not the same as a promise that everything goes back to the way it was. Sometimes it does, often it does not. What God promises is not sameness. He promises something better, and better is defined by Him, not by us. The principle in Isaiah 61 verse 7 is stated plainly. Instead of your shame, there shall be a double portion, not the original portion, a double portion. But the double portion is given in exchange for the shame, it does not pretend the shame did not exist. This is worth sitting with. If you are waiting for God to restore something specifically to the form it took before it was lost, that may or may not be what comes. What you can trust is that what God restores will be sufficient, that His faithfulness in the latter days will not be less than His faithfulness in the earlier ones. And often, not always, but often, the very things that were stripped away become the foundation of something stronger than what existed before. God does not abandon what He started, and what He restores completely.